Welcome to another episode of the Millennials and Community Podcast. This week's episode is all about travel. Edited roughly 2 hours before Carlo jumps on a plane to Tokyo, join Matt and Carlo as they share the lessons learned, the opportunities given, and why travel is food for the soul. Thank you for being part of our community. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Millennials and Community Podcast. I'm Carlo. That is Matt. We affectionately call this show the Mac Podcast. So glad that you're here with us. Super excited to talk about what we're going to talk about today, mostly because it shares from some of our past experiences, both together and separate. And before we get into that, we're going to start off with our opening icebreakers. And in kind of the vein of the show, so we're going to give it away a little bit quicker. We're going to be talking about the idea of the travel bug. But Matt, our opening icebreaker today, tell us a story about someone you met on vacation that kind of changed or shifted your view of community while on that vacation.
Yeah, for sure. So in 2016, I went down to San Diego, and I should preface this by saying that I've been so lucky to meet just incredible people while traveling. Quirky people, wonderful people, not that those are mutually exclusive, but this one was really the first one that was a memorable human that I met while traveling. Well, I went to San Diego and I stayed in a hostel right on the beach, right on Ocean Beach. For those of you who know San Diego, Ocean Beach is kind of like not quite the most popular beach, but kind of like the little bit less touristy beach. And so I stayed at a hostel right on the beach. First person I met when I walked through the door, he introduces himself as Thor. Now, just for context, to paint the picture, Thor is this really skinny. He's probably 5'9". He's got dreadlocks with frosted tips, and he's wearing a beanie, and it's just like a weird kind of vibe. And so Thor was just, he knew everyone at the hostel, and I just kept asking things like, how long have you been here for? Do you work here? Oh no, I don't work here at the hostel. I've stayed here for a couple weeks now. And he knew all the staff, he knew all the guests, he knew absolutely everybody that was there. And so I started to poke and prod to try to get some more information. I'm like, first of all, what's your name? Because your name absolutely is not Thor. He's like, no, it's Thor. And so as a trick that I've learned, thanks to another friend of ours, it took me taking a look at his passport to find out that his name was in fact Arthur. And he went by Thor. And so for the rest of the trip, I started calling him Artie, which he didn't really appreciate. But Thor, I came to find out, is both independently wealthy, but also was honorably discharged from the Navy. At 19 years old, he was on an aircraft carrier on deployment, and thought it would be really funny to light up some flares from the deck of the aircraft carrier just for fun. So he got himself, honorably kicked out of the Navy. I think honorably, we're going to go with that because I don't want to smear his name, and wound up in San Diego. Well, turns out that he was staying in the hostel because his multi-million-dollar mansion in San Diego was under renovations, and he thought it would be just a really cool opportunity to connect with people, meet travelers, and learn about community by staying in this hostel rather than staying in a hotel that he could most clearly afford. At 21 at the time that I met him, he was an independent contractor who had sold a business or two and in the IT space, and was just doing amazingly well for himself. And what I learned from Artie, or Thor, or Arthur, was that, it really, the degree to which somebody has different levels of financial wealth doesn't necessarily impact the way that they're able to interact with community, and that travel and places like hostels that form communities in and around traveling are not unique to certain levels of income or certain levels of wealth, but they're just places where great people can come and connect, and just taught me a lot about how to build relationships out of thin air with people that you've never met before from all over around the world.
And that is so cool, because I am blessed enough to have spent a fair amount of time with wealthy people. And I can tell you that the wealthiest people are the nicest. They're the most understanding, the most caring. They want to know the most about you. They'll ask you, you'll be like, why does this person care about me in any way, shape, or form? We're in entirely different income brackets. Now, of course, I'm not talking about the ultra billionaire wealthy. I have no idea how those people act. But like your everyday wealthy, like nice home, nice car, they're just as kind. They're just as wonderful people. And so that doesn't surprise me at all. The way you described him surprises me a little bit, but I think that's a super cool story.
Oh, it surprised me. By the time that I figured out what his real name was and he confided in me about the real reason that he was at this hostel, I was just very, very taken aback, because certainly he didn't get the image of somebody who had sold a multi-million-dollar company and just slumming it on the beach hostel just for kicks.
I don't know. I think that might be what I would do too. Maybe I think after a while you get tired of the opulence, perhaps.
That may be. What about you? What is someone you've met while traveling?
Well, and I would love to say that I have such a diverse story as you do, but I don't think I do. And I'm going to say this with all the sense of gratitude in the world, but the travel that I got to do as a kid was very much the resort travel. Right, my parents would take us to these places, and kind of what I learned through this is because both of my parents are, well, my mother is the quintessential Italian woman, right? She just loves to gab, loves to make friends. My father is the quintessential Italian man. He's very quiet until you piss him off. So he doesn't say much, but my parents would always manage to make friends on these trips while we're at the resort in Mexico. But none of that ever really extended past the trip. Right after that, we went our separate ways. And I get sometimes you live in separate parts of the world, but there was no real reason to maintain this communication. Well, that all changed for me when we went to Costa Rica, because I was super prepared to make some great friends on the trip and then just never see them again. And then, coming back, even just 2 weeks ago, we went to go and visit our friends Sean and Kyle, who were on an episode last season for us, and just spent an evening with them having a great time and catching up. And, but it taught me very much that you can continue, especially in today's world of online communities and communication, you can continue these fantastic friendships. And I thought that was a really great lesson for me, because I love the idea of having people throughout the world being like, hey, actually, I'm one of the things we're going to talk about on this episode is I'm headed to Tokyo next month, and I have a friend who's currently living in Tokyo. So I saw him the other night. He came into town, and I said, oh, I forgot to tell you. I don't even know why I didn't tell you, but I'm coming to Tokyo next month. And he's like, oh, we're going to show you around. We're going to take you everywhere. We're going to do all of these things. And so we're super excited. So I love the idea of having people all over the world. And just because you meet somebody on a resort that lives in a different part of the world, I don't think means that you can't, continue that relationship if it was a good relationship. Don't let the vacation stay on the vacation, I guess. All right. So obviously, if you can't tell by now, what today's episode is all going to be about travel lessons, right? Turning that travel bug that we all have into growth, opportunity, real soul feeding kind of activities, and allowing us to be better humans because of it. And I think for a lot of us, we look at travel as either something you do while you're really young and you have no responsibility, or you look at it as something you're going to do when you're much older. And the point and the argument that I think that both of us are going to try and make today is that doesn't matter what side of the spectrum that you're on, especially if you're a millennial listening to this show, you're right in the middle of it. Travel can be such a soul-feeding experience that you have to make it a priority here. And we're going to share some really great things with you guys, and we're super excited for the episode. So, Matt, what would be, what would be your reasoning as to why you think this is a prudent conversation to have? Like, arguably, travel is an expense right now that a lot of people can't really have.
Yeah, no, it's a very good point, and we definitely do want to acknowledge that travel is absolutely a privilege. It is absolutely a privilege that certainly is not available or accessible to everybody. And later on, when we get to closer to the end, we want to talk about a few strategies to hopefully make travel more accessible to some people. But we want to acknowledge that certainly it is a privilege. But while it is a privilege, it's just some of the things that I've been able to learn, and both about myself and about the world, to me, far outpace anything that I've learned in other places. And so I mentioned already my trip to San Diego, and really that was the first time that I had traveled on my own, with no particular draw or pull, I suppose. Like, I wasn't going to a resort. It wasn't for an amusement park or anything like that. It was very much just, I wanted to get away. I wanted to experience a different part of the world, albeit, of course, San Diego is still a part of the United States. And so from culturally speaking, still reasonably close, or as close to Canada as you're likely to find. But it really, really opened my eyes to the opportunity to experience the world through the lens of people that you connect with while traveling, through the lens of another place, understanding and immersing yourself in the food and the culture and the people that you experienced along the way. And so for me, immediately, I found that it was worth the time, the money, the energy invested, and it just became something that was so profound in my life that, I think is very, very worthwhile. For those of you that, again, certainly there is the accessibility component, but for those of you that have the means but have never really been drawn to traveling, you're certainly the people that we want to speak to today.
Yeah. So, there's obviously the general travel bug is what is inspiring us to make this episode, because we're on this show, we're all about trying to encourage you guys to do things that are going to help you grow. And by extension, those encourage us to grow. So what really inspired this episode, in my belief, is, of course, we've shared it on the show before, the Costa Rica trip we had in 2022. Yeek. It's a long time ago. You had a trip to Central America that I'm sure you'll share some stories and some great learning opportunities. And then, like I said, I'm headed to Japan next month with some really dear close friends of mine. So I'm super excited on that. So when we say traveling, you kind of already touched on it a little bit here, but what would you consider traveling in the general sense? What does that actually mean to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, a lot of people will go on their one trip a year, 10 days to Mexico. They go to the same resort. They sit on the beach. They drink margaritas and eat all-inclusive food and gorge themselves for a week and then go home. And that's their idea of traveling. And to be clear, that is wonderful experience, wonderful opportunity to go and take that rest of relaxation, really recharge yourself, whether you're feeling stressed, burnt out, whatever the case may be. But that's not what I mean when I say travel. For me, traveling is not going to a resort. Traveling is not going to even an amusement park, really, like the Disneylands, the Disney Worlds, where these experiences are incredibly curated to the visitor, to the tourist. Mm-hmm. And so you're not really experiencing an authentic cultural experience, but rather you're seeing a very manicured perception of what the business operator wants you to have. Not taking anything away from those experiences. That's just not what we're referring to when we talk about travel in this way. So for us, when I talk about travel, I talk about getting the opportunity to go places where you get to fully immerse yourself in a local culture, a local way of being, and just fully experience a different place that is outside of the norm of what you would experience in your typical day-to-day life.
Yeah, and I would agree with you here, because for those of you that have had the opportunity to do the kind of travel that we're talking about, there's a very different sense of experience when it comes to it. And the only way that I can describe it is that it's a sense of calm. It's a sense of very much inward kind of soul feeling, because you can sit there and you're in the throes of this new experience, this, not touristy thing at all. It can be the most simplistic thing in the world, but because it's so outside of your comfort zone, so outside of the normal for you, you can very much feel that it's different. And it feeds you in such a way that you will continue to think on that topic for years to come. So that is what we're encouraging you guys to do, is to kind of seek out those experiences. And again, like Matt said, there's nothing wrong with going to a resort. We did that in November of last year, but I definitely did not come back feeling as recharged from that experience as I did from our Costa Rica trip or any other great out of the norm kind of experience.
Well, and for me, it comes down to our own comfort zone. And we do, human beings are creatures of habit. We do everything that we can to create for ourselves a life where we experience safety first. And then upon safety as a foundation, we try to create stability, right? And all of that is really an attempt to create this area of comfort. We can think of comfort in terms of physical comforts, financial comforts, relational comforts, right? We try to create a comfortable state for ourselves to exist in. The problem is that when we find these opportunities for comfort, we sometimes will lean into being comfortable at the expense of our own self-growth. Mm-hmm. And for me, what proper traveling really does is it takes us, literally, figuratively out of our comfort zones and forces us to be uncomfortable, which is a place where we are really equipped to learn new things, and not only learn new things about the places that we get to go and the cultures and all those sorts of things, but you learn a lot about yourself as well. So often when we're here in our homes, in our comfort zones, in our day-to-day, we're able to live our lives on some type of an autopilot where we're able to compensate for some of the challenges that we might experience, whether it be with self-confidence or, our own things that we're trying to come to grips with in our own life. It can be easier to suppress those things when we have those comforts of home. And oftentimes when you're traveling, you're just slapped in the face with some of these other things that you have to address. And you find out really quickly to what level you are confident with yourself.
Yeah, you're very right. Like travel, especially in a capacity where you're not surrounded by a whole bunch of your friends from back home, it really forces you to step into this is who I am, confidence kind of level. And if you can't do it, you're arguably going to get a significantly less profound experience out of that travel. And that is probably one of the scariest things for people, like the idea of going on a trip on your own and, backpacking around, or even just going with one or two friends, but then still being encouraged to reach outside of that friend group. That is a daunting thing, but it is so rewarding to do. And I can't speak enough. Back in Costa Rica, we went on a Kentucky trip, right? And that was a group of what? How many of us? Almost 30 people. And, as much as it was great to have you and I be together, we ended up reaching out and making sure we were sitting with different people on the bus and getting an opportunity to meet everybody. But that takes a very large amount of confidence and a step forward into the unknown, but so rewarding to do.
And when you have the opportunity to meet new people in a circumstance like traveling, probably anytime you meet new people, but certainly it's easiest to experience it through traveling. It's a really great opportunity to test the perceptions that we have of ourselves. I think that we, again, coming back to our comfort zone, the friends and family, the people around us that we know and accept us and love us for who we are, sometimes aren't the best mirrors for who we show up as. And sometimes it takes being immersed in a really intensive way like travel with a group of strangers to really understand and mirror back to you how you are perceived, and the level to which how I perceive myself is similar or not similar to the way that people see me. And I've experienced, I've done now 4 of these Kentucky trips, and what I see with the people on them is the people that typically have the hardest time connecting with the groups are oftentimes the ones who in my estimation, their perception of themselves is the least compatible with how other people are perceiving themselves to be.
Yeah, no, that is a very fair assessment. And that is, I think, a struggle in everyday life is how do you view yourself versus how other people view you. And we could do a whole episode on imposter syndrome and all sorts of stuff there. But okay, so we've shared a little bit about some of the, the more recent things, some of the stuff as adults we've really appreciated. But what was your first travel experience? Like, who'd you do it with? Where'd you go? And what would you say you learned not only about your world, but about yourself during this kind of first experience? Because for a lot of people that travel a lot, it was that first experience that got them hooked.
Yeah, so I'll come back to the San Diego trip. 2016, it was the beginning of November, and I had just gotten out of a relatively long-term relationship at that point, and I needed to just go away and have a little bit of a reset. Didn't really have a plan. I had a week off of work and decided I was going to book this trip somewhere that was my checklist was somewhere that was warm, somewhere that was one flight away so I didn't have to connect anywhere, and somewhere that, it was reasonably close that I could go for a week and feel like I was making the most of my time. So I booked this trip to San Diego. It was my first time traveling by myself, first time, and not for work, I should say. First time traveling by myself, not for work, meaning I didn't have anybody on the other end ready to receive me, host me, whatever the case may be. And it was the most remarkable experience because it was also the first time staying in a hostel. So I kind of had some reservations about what was this experience going to be like? How am I going to mesh? Is there going to be anybody that I'm there and I'm friends with? And so I remember getting off the plane in San Diego and thinking, what am I doing here? And I got my luggage and I went and I found an Uber and got to the hostel. I was too early to check in. And I was still just in this, what on earth? What are you doing here? Why are you here by yourself? What are you going to do? You're going to be bored. You're going to be lonely. You're not going to have anything to entertain you. And now you've just wasted all this money to get to California for the week. So I went and I sat on the beach because the beach was about a block away from the hostel. And I sat there and I just stared at the waves and I stared at the waves. And I just came to the place where I just started to smile. I started to realize that this was an opportunity for me to do something with myself, for myself, by myself. And that was just, it was this wave of self-assurance that I got to experience. Now, a couple of really, really interesting things. Again, we mentioned how the United States really culturally is the closest you're going to find to Canada, but the timing of my trip was very curious, and it led to some very interesting learnings about the world. So for those of you that recall, or those of you that are trying to forget, the second week in November in 2016, there was a very significant world-changing event that happened in the United States. It was the week that Donald Trump got elected to president of the United States. So there I was on the second Tuesday of November, and I was sitting in this hostel watching the election coverage on TV. And as you can imagine, there are international people all around watching this in absolute horror, seeing the impending win of Donald Trump. And of course, you're in California, which is a very Democrat heavy state, and so you're not very few people are excited about this idea of Trump either. And it was a remarkable cultural experience to see how, global politics can affect both individual people from different parts of the world, but then affect people on a state level. Every Uber driver, taxi driver, server, all they wanted to talk about was Donald Trump. But interestingly as well, I had met someone from the US on that trip who was a Trump supporter. And so I spent a lot of time talking with her, trying to understand what it was, the reasons for her supporting Trump, what it was that made that appealing to her, but also like what it was that she was feeling being in a place where the political candidate that she supports was so like universally hated by everyone that we came across. And it was just a fascinating cultural experience to learn about really US politics, but then my first foray into understanding how different people in the world perceive Americans, by extension, like how I fit in as a Canadian, and how Canada plays a huge role in my identity. And so I got to learn about that. I got to learn more about California food, and just it was just a wonderful experience to really anchor my self-assurance, but then also to start to learn more about global politics and how they play a role for everybody.
Yeah, that would have been a crazy time to be down in the States, especially in such an opposite view area. Okay, so I again, I'm going to reiterate with the fact that I'm a very blessed human to have traveled the way that I did as a kid, because that was 2016. So how old would you have been there?
Whatever 32 minus 8 is, so what, 24?
Okay. So, my first real, I want to say international trip, because we did a little bit around North America and stuff like that as a kid. But when I was about 13 or 14, I remember going, my mom took me to Italy, and we went for 2 months. And there was this point in time, I'm the oldest of three. I had my little sister with me, and my mom had sent us with family on a trip, like to drive around Milan. And I don't remember what we were doing. We were going to pick something up. We were getting ice cream. I can't remember, but it was like the most innocent thing. And I'm sitting in the backseat of this car as like a 12 or 13-year-old. And I got my little sister next to me, and I don't speak any of the language, beyond the little things. My mom is not with us. She's been our translator this entire trip. This is like maybe a day or two into the trip. We're still jet lagged. And I just started bawling. I was so lost. And I was like, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to communicate with these people. I don't know them. This is my first time meeting them. I know their family, but what does that really mean? And I felt so lost, so scared. It's it's night out. We're in the back of this car. And I want to give my family members credit. They knew something was wrong. They wanted to help, but they didn't know how to communicate with me either. And there came this point where I kind of just, sniffled it all in. And I said, look, nothing bad is going to happen. You are with family in a country that is arguably very caring about strangers. You will be fine. You will figure it out. And sure enough, we stopped for ice cream. We got ice cream. It was delicious. And we went back home. Nothing bad happened. My mom asked me later, your family thought something was wrong. What happened? I said, I felt uncomfortable. But it was this moment for me of realization, to be like, all of these stories that we paint in our head, very similar to what you were explaining before you went and sat on the beach, we paint in our head of like, why am I here? What am I going to do? This doesn't feel right. I'm uncomfortable. I'm here by myself. All those things, yes, arguably they're scary, but they're scary because it gave me an opportunity to look within myself and say, I can grow and I can do this. I'm fine. But without that experience, I would have never known it. And from that point forward, every time I've traveled, I've always tried to put myself in a position of being uncomfortable. And every time I've done so, I've found a new way to grow. I found a new way to fall in love all over with the travel experience. And I look back upon that trip very, very fondly, because I got to learn so much about people that I would have never met before. Like, I have so much family in Italy that I still don't know. And I've been to Italy 4 times now. So I will always look upon that trip very, very fondly, of like this moment of existential dread turning into this moment of empowerment.
And so I think that existential dread is a really interesting thing, because I think people anticipate feeling that way, and it turns them off from ever taking the plunge and actually doing the adventure. I think for a lot of people, the only way that they get over that initially is this romanticization of a destination, and then they leap in 2 feet in, and then they kind of figure it out and deal with the existential dread once they get there. But I think for a lot of people, they're held up by that sense of, oh, why would I do that by myself? I hate being alone. And just, I think there's so much to be gained by having time by yourself, with yourself, for yourself. And I think that so many of us get caught up in our own heads when we are by ourselves. But I think that everybody needs a healthy amount of time where we are allowed to be with ourselves and only for ourselves.
And I think this leads us into kind of the next question really, really well, is that why do you think that giving ourselves this opportunity to experience something arguably as terrifying as that is so relevant, so important to millennials?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of reasons. And certainly, once again, you did a great job of outlining that oftentimes we think of either retirement or when we are first graduating, whether it's graduating from high school and take a gap year, or if you choose post-secondary, some people travel following their degree before entering the workforce, right? And those are kind of the more common times to travel. However, a couple things. One, as millennials, the band of ages that the millennials sit in, for most people, you're going to be approaching, statistically, you're not at your max earning potential, but certainly you're approaching it. And presumably for most people, you're at your highest you've ever earned in terms of your positionality within your respective careers. And you probably at this point in time, and certainly you could speak to this more with your background, have some of the fewest monetary obligations, right? You're not quite at the age yet for most millennials where you're having to take care of parents or older generations. You're probably, some of millennials certainly have families, but for most millennials, you're not looking at things like college expenses for your kids or some of those types of things. So, you're kind of in this sweet spot again, talking very globally for the majority of people, where you have fairly high earning capacity and relatively low financial obligations. Again, that is not universal across the board. Sure. But what I think that means is certainly there is the opportunity to be able to take time to travel in the years that we're experiencing as millennials. But then also there's just so much going on around us. And we've talked a lot lately in episodes about how different political dynamics impact community at a single issue level or at a full-blown provincial, national, international level. And I think as millennials, we're starting to recognize that, as you've pointed out in numerous episodes, that we have a role to play in shaping our communities and that we're going to be needing to step into some of these roles, whether it's actively or passively, to support the ways in which our communities are shaped in the coming decades. So, traveling is a really key part in terms of our ability to contextualize what's happening on an international scale. I think that if we stay home and we don't take the opportunity to travel and don't take the opportunity to explore outside of our four-wall box, we can get very, very holed up in this is how it's always been, this is what my community does, therefore this is how we should always continue to be. And I think it's very I would say it's an obligation of our generation to be able to understand how different cultures pursue different ways of life so that we can understand some of the pros and cons of different ways of knowing and being and living so that we can try to bring some of the best to shape the communities that we're a part of. And I think that's incumbent on us as a millennial generation.
People gravitate towards visionary people. People gravitate towards the people that they feel have something to offer in terms of leadership and guidance. And those people tend to be worldly people. They've traveled, they've experienced, they've done things, they've had the thoughts, the conversations that allow them to weigh sides of issues. So if we're meant to be the next generation of thought leaders and politicians and world leaders that we need to be, we have to be able to step into those positions that allow us to grow. So travel arguably is a cheat code to allow you to do those things, to grow and to experience. And we're so blessed to have this beautiful world available to us. And I want to make this very clear. I'm not an expert in global warming or any of the things that are happening to our environment. But when you look at the opportunities that are available to us in terms of travel and all of the beauties of the world that exist today, there's a chance that the generations following us may not have those beauties for much longer. That's right. So I think it's more important than ever to really take advantage of it while you can. So speaking of that, Matt, I love all the stuff that you and Carlo are talking about. I want to travel the world, but life is expensive. expensive right now. How do I do this? How do I take advantage? How do I go out and grow myself? How can I actually save the money necessary to go on these trips without it hurting me financially?
Totally. And like we spoke about a lot in the escapism episode, travel is an investment. And so it's not going to be free unless you're lucky enough that you get to travel as a matter of your work. And you know, I've certainly been lucky enough to travel quite a bit for work, including, you know, my most recent trip getting to travel to Mexico for a conference. But that's not the reality for everybody. So for me, there's really three things that we can do to help mitigate the cost of our travel, and perhaps you have more to add. The first one that I would say is really plan in advance. I think that, you know, certainly airfare and accommodations as two of the most significant expenses that you're going to face with any sort of significant international travel. There is significant price fluctuation that happens with both of those things. And so one of the best things that you can do to set yourself up for success is planning far enough out so you can see and ride the peaks and valleys of the price changes in these things. Because typically if you're going to wait until the last minute, you certainly are experiencing this with your upcoming Japan trip, getting gouged for flights. You buy yourself the opportunity to purchase these things at a better deal if you're planning more in advance. So I'd say plan in advance, the first one. Second one, really focus on getting off the beaten path. Certainly when you're in a destination, tourist traps are so because they are based around really, really key destinations and beautiful things. So you think of some of the world monuments or UNESCO World Heritage sites or these sorts of things that are part of the draw to a certain destination. And by all means, go and experience that. But also recognize too that any of these tourist destinations have districts or squares that are incredibly touristy. And so if you think about a South American, Central American, European towns, the price difference, particularly for food and beverage, of eating or dining or drinking right in that tourist square versus a block and a half off of the square is significant. And you've talked to me a lot about your experience in Italy with this being the case. So be willing to take that step, 1 block, 2 blocks off of the main touristy square, and you're going to see huge savings. The third is look for people, seek advice from people who have already been. The nice thing about being in our age bracket, there's probably somebody you know who has been to the place that you're interested in going. Talk to them, see what they would recommend, what they would suggest. They're going to have some great suggestions for you, not only on where to go, but probably on ways to cut costs based on their experience with ways that they either got gouged or ways that they would do it in the future if they had a chance to do over.
Yeah. And you know, to provide a little bit more into the while you're there, like I know that this is very relevant for Italy, but I would argue to say that it's relevant for almost everywhere. One of my favorite experiences about being in Italy as an adult was that we did our best to live and dine the way the Italians did. So, you know, for
early and often.
Oh, yes, lots of wine. But like first thing in the morning, most hotels will serve you a breakfast that is not an American breakfast. There's no bacon, there's no eggs, although there was one woman during my travels that was very upset about this. But they will serve you pastries, they'll serve you coffee. That is the way Italians eat their breakfast. It's, you know, it's not a full meal. It's a way to get you started. And then we would walk up the block to the local deli and we would, you know, buy some buns and we would get them to make the sandwiches with the prosciutto and the sopressata right there for us. So as we were, you know, climbing through the ruins of Rome, we would just stop and sit and eat a meal instead of going to the side at that little kiosk that was charging 20 euros for a sandwich. We paid €1.50 for this arguably much bigger sandwich, right? When we went to go find dinner, we would walk around, and instead of being on the main strips where you would find arguably the worst food at higher prices, we would walk up the street. And there was one great story is this guy looks at me and he says, in English, he goes, "You're Italian, but you're not from here." And I said, "Yes, I'm from Canada." And he says, "Come back to me when it's time for dinner I promise we'll take care of you. And he treated us to the most amazing fresh lobster spaghetti dinner I could have ever asked for. But it was only because we went for a walk and explored and tried to find the places. Like, there's a lot of Italians eating there. That's where I should eat. So be open to living the way that people in that country are living, and you will experience more and pay arguably a lot less. Okay, so why is this relevant to community? Because we're the Millennials and Community Show. Why is travel, which is arguably something that is a solo experience, a solo growth prospect, why is that something that is relevant to our communities?
Yeah, so making a big assumption here, certainly as most or all of you know, Carlo and I are based here in Canada, specifically Calgary, Alberta. And I would hazard a guess that most of our listenership is coming to us from relatively westernized countries, whether it be North America, Western Europe, these sorts of things, the UK, absolutely. And I think one thing that is a common trait amongst Western countries, Western communities, is they're highly individualistic. Mm-hmm. We pride ourselves in, the American dream. We're going to, off of our own blood, sweat, and tears, create a life for us and our partners and our families, and we are going to just roll up our sleeves and we're going to get it done in spite of everything and everyone around us. Well, most of the world doesn't operate that way. Not at all. Most of the world has just such a different and more nuanced sense of what it means to be a part of a community. You go to so many places around the world and everyone's uncle and auntie, and everyone is a cousin, everyone's a brother, sister, because they just have such a different view on how to support and take care and embrace the humans in their environment. And so instead of that individualistic society that we have grown up in Western cultures, so many places around the world embrace community as something that is essential to their way of life, whether it's hosting and feeding anybody with these big communal dinners, very neighborly approaches, looking after each other's kids, right? These multi-generational, in a lot of cases, families that form these deep-rooted communities. This is something that is much less common in Western cultures. And so I think from a community lens, there is huge value in people from Western countries, Western societies, getting to experience more communal cultures that put such a higher emphasis on the value of multi-generational family connection, embracing the nature of your town or your community as a whole and what it means to support and love other people.
Yeah, it's, the best story that I can think of is an old neighbor of mine. He just actually moved away, but he's from Honduras. And he comes, when I first met him, he looks over the fence at me and he goes, oh, hi, this is my name. How are you? Yeah. And we get to chatting. And he goes, at the end of our conversation, he looks at me, he says, I'm so glad I have a good neighbor, because back home, we would get together every week for dinner and our kids would grow up together. And he says, I'm afraid here in Canada, because he had moved relatively recently, like a few years, that I wouldn't have that. Now, did we get together every day for dinner? No. Every week? No. Every month? No. But it was so nice to know that there was this person next to us that we could have that kind of wonderful kind of community with. And that is something, but you barely know your neighbors most of the time in our Western environment. So, okay. So make actions count. Our new favorite acronym, right? MAC, make actions count. What are we going to do about this? How are we going to move forward? How are we going to pick up this idea of, I want to travel, I want to grow. How do I actually make this a plan and do it? Because I've been inspired by Matt and Carlo.
Yeah, so I would say that just like everything that I do, I kind of have a little bit of a process that I've laid out. And if you are watching this and or listening and you think to yourself, you know what, this is my chance. This is my opportunity to start thinking about what my next adventure is going to look like. I think the first thing is you have to identify what your destination is. You have to figure out what that location is that you want to explore. And maybe it's as simple as creating yourself a vision board of images from certain places from that destination that inspire you, that is going to motivate you and push you. I think the second one is you want to pick a time goal or a date or something like that you can hold yourself accountable. So for me, there is Australia and or New Zealand. For all of our Kiwi and Aussie friends, I know they're not the same thing. Bear with me. Both of those countries have been high on my list to travel to for a long, long time. And so certainly that's down the road, kind of the next on my list of travel destinations. What's my time, my date? Well, it so happens that there's a conference that I'm looking forward to attending in that part of the world in 2026. And it hasn't been announced when that year will be yet, but it'll be sometime in 2026. And so that's kind of my time frame for working on trying to find a way to get down there. And then really the third step, just like anything else, we are self-respecting adults. We need to figure out what that budget is. So we need to understand and start doing some of the preliminary research. Look at how much are flights costing? What are a common hotel night in the destination that you're looking for? What types of transportation are common? Are you going to be relying on public transportation, trains, buses, ferries, planes, or are you going to be renting a car? Is a car appropriate? Is it somewhere like Costa Rica where if you don't have a 4x4, you won't be able to get around properly, right? Like some of these things that you have to budget and account for. And then making that plan, figuring out, am I going to start saving now on a monthly basis? Am I going to, when am I going to look at booking? Are there other people that we want to bring along with us on these adventures, and really start to articulate this plan and revisit that plan as you go along. I think for me, that's the most important. But again, it starts with picking that destination, that place that is really inspiring you.
Yeah. And I would add one other thing, in our past episode, we talked a lot about our online communities. Well, social media, love it or hate it, has opened up the world of not only getting experience in small snippets of these places you may want to visit, but there's so many content creators that have made it their business to share with you the little secrets of traveling there. So of course, my social media has been flooded with TikTok, with Tokyo related, Japan related things, where to eat, what to do, how to skip the line, when's the best time to go, what to wear. So like dive into that, because arguably you could be wasting a lot of time on social media. You might as well waste it on something like that. Okay. I love what we've talked about. I think it's so great that, hopefully we've inspired somebody to want to travel the world and experience something that they've never experienced and grow. We're so happy that, we get to do that so often, and again, feel very blessed about it. So as our closing icebreaker, Matt, I have to ask you, if you were to describe your dream vacation only using a movie title, what would that title be?
So I went a little bit extra. I went for a few movies to kind of pull it all together. For those of you that don't know, one of my favorite movies is Hitch. It is mostly because of Will Smith, who then kind of by default is one of my favorite actors. And so I would summarize my dream vacation with three Will Smith movies. First would be Focus, which is a movie all about understanding. I mean, it's a heist movie, but it's all about understanding people's attention and where they place their focus and their time and their attention. And so I would say Focus first. The second one that I would say is, Independence Day. Not because of the gigantic fighting alien suits, but more so just to understand that is your opportunity to really come to learn about yourself, understand and appreciate and develop a sense of self-assurance that you may or may not already have, or reaffirm that sense of self-assurance. And then the third one would be the pursuit of happiness, right? For me, travel is all about pursuing the best version of myself, getting the opportunity to learn more about the world so I can better myself and hopefully experience more self-fulfillment therein.
Love it. I'm going to go a little on the nose, Under the Tuscan Sun. Now, if you haven't seen that movie, Diane Lane does a wonderful job, has a midlife crisis. She travels to Tuscany. She buys a rundown old Tuscan villa, completely redoes it, makes this beautiful home out of it, of course, is swept off of her feet by a gorgeous Italian man, which I'm not saying is
That's the dream, is to find a nice,
gorgeous Italian man in Tuscany. But I love the idea. I've always, like, every time I go to Italy, I fall in love with it all over again. Not only for the cultural heritage that I have, but for the country and the people and everything. So the idea of like just going there and spending enough time to be completely engrossed in the culture would just be so wonderfully lovely to me. And I think would be such an amazing opportunity. So I'm going to go with that. Now to close us off, Matt, we're going to do what we normally do with our gratitude. And I'm going to share some gratitude in a general sense and in a specific sense. And the general sense is that I have been very, very blessed to travel as much as I have. And, you know, that comes from some of my past employment opportunities. It comes from being, you know, in a financial position that has awarded me that. But I've also been in periods of my life where I have not been able to travel. So I want to share my gratitude to the world for just being able to be at a point in my life again where I can. And I can do so with people that I love and that I can experience and grow it. And my more specific is that I get to travel so often with you and with other great people that elevate those trips and elevate those experiences in ways that wouldn't be the same without them.
Thank you. I appreciate you sharing all of that. Mine is very, very similar. I mean, in a general sense, I am very, very grateful that I've had the opportunity to do a significant amount of traveling through the course of my work. And most of the traveling that I've done within Canada. And so for those of you that don't know the Canadian context, it's cheaper to get to Europe than it is to the other side of Canada in terms of flight and other costs, just the way that the airfare is set up. So thanks to my work, I've gotten the chance to explore Canada quite drastically. And as much as we've talked about different international travel, I would suggest that any Canadians really invest the time to learn more about the different regions within our country, because whether it is the territories, whether it's the Pacific coast, whether it's BC in the lower mainland or even the Okanagan, or whether it's the prairies, whether it's Ontario, the Canadian Shield, the amazing French-Canadian history that we have, or the incredible diversity of the Maritimes, the diversity that we have in this country in and of itself, it makes me so appreciative to be Canadian, because I understand that that is not a monolithic thing, that Canadians are not one thing, that we are so diverse. And so I'm so grateful that I've gotten to experience that, because without my work opportunities, I wouldn't have traveled to the Maritimes or the territories, to name a few. I'm also really grateful for you in the same way that you shared. The people that I feel most connected to in my life, I've been lucky enough to travel with every single one of them, you included. This is not a coincidence. This is, you go and you experience things together, and the things that we've done, it strengthens, as much as it teaches you about yourself, it teaches you a lot about the relationships that you hold and that you hold dear. And so I'm really grateful that you're one of the people that I've gotten to spend a lot of time traveling with, and it's just reinforced how grateful I am for our relationship and our friendship.
Thank you. Well, guys, we hope that we've inspired you to travel the world, go do something you've never done before, feel that existential dread once or twice, and we hope all the best for you. Please like, share, comment, subscribe, do all the things that most YouTubers will ask you to do. It really helps the podcast grow. Other than that, guys, thank you, and we'll see you later.
Take care, everyone.
Hi, guys, it's Carlo here. Thank you for listening to our latest episode. It's the support of our community like you that allows us to continue to grow and make this into something truly extraordinary. If you enjoyed today's episode and you would like to listen to it without the interruption of ads and maybe even experience some bonus content, I'd invite you to join us on our newly launched Patreon. And if maybe that's not something you can do right now, please consider liking, subscribing, sharing, and commenting on places like YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, Facebook, all that good stuff. You'll find us under @Millennials and Community for pretty much all of those. Thank you again for listening, and we'll see you again soon.